Alright, this is the Zeiss Biotar 58mm f2, as well as the Helios 44-2. These are pretty much the same lenses, the Helios 44-2 being a copy of the original Zeiss Jenna. But again, they're pretty much the same lenses. Whichever one you get will pretty much give you the same output. So that's kind of why I have both of them included here. So the Zeiss Biotar 58mm f2 lens was produced between the 1930s and the 1960s. So this is an extremely old lens. Some copies are getting close to being 100 years old at this point, which is crazy. And it's definitely gonna make sense because this is the most wild, vintage looking characteristic lens on this list. This is an awesome lens, one of the most fun lenses to use and the most fun looking output, but it definitely has a very specialized look to it, which I'm sure you'll see in just a second. And then of course we have the Helios 44-2, which is a direct copy of the Zeiss lens. This was produced between the 1960s and the 1990s. And like I said, this is literally a direct copy of the Zeiss lens, and they're both pretty much gonna have the exact same look, the exact output, and all your pictures and videos and everything are pretty much gonna look the same with both of these lenses, give or take a very few minor differences. And like I said, these are the most unique looking vintage lenses. You know, on the outside they look pretty cool, but mostly just in what they can produce. So you're gonna get some crazy background separation with these. You know, being 58mm f2, you're gonna have that really shallow depth of field, but going even further into that, the bokeh and the out of focus areas on these lenses are gonna be super swirly, especially around the edges and stuff. It's gonna look really crazy and kind of like warped, while still getting a really sharp image on the very center. You know, I wouldn't say it's tack sharp or anything like that, but the combination of a really sharp center with the crazy out of focus warped edges and corners can give you some amazing, like some of the best looking vintage lens photos and videos that you can pretty much get. Now the build quality of these is pretty great as well. They're both made out of metal. They're really dense, but also very tiny lenses, especially in comparison to like the Canon FD lens. You know, they're what is that, 1/3 of the height of, you know, a Canon FD 70 to 210mm. So these are very tiny lenses and, like I said, very, very specialized use cases. But if there's one vintage lens that I would recommend looking into or picking up, you know, especially if it's your first ever vintage lens and you just want to get that extreme vintage look, or if you just don't have one of these in your vintage lens collection right now, this is definitely the one that I would recommend picking up. You can just get some crazy, crazy stylized images and videos out of these. If you want that vintage look to be pushed to the extreme for a music video, for a film, or for portraits or photography, and you need, you know, a 58mm portrait focal length, you just cannot go wrong with a Zeiss 58mm f2 or a Helios 44-2 58mm f2 lens. Now when it comes to pricing, these are also both a little bit different from each other. So the knockoff Helios 44-2, you can pick this up anywhere from like $50 to $150. Typically it's around like $80, $75, $100 for this lens. So about the price that, you know, a new Canon 50mm lens would be pretty much. And then the original Zeiss lens, which, you know, I recommend just because it's the original thing. It's older, you know, maybe it'll have a little bit more of that vintage look just because it's, you know, 10, 20, 30 years older than the Helios 44-2 is. This lens is going to be a little bit more expensive, so depending on the version that you get, it's going to be right around $150 to $200, maybe $250. So right around the $200 versus right around $100 price point. And like I said, either one of these you can't go wrong with. They both give amazing looking photos and videos. Honestly, just some of the most extreme, amazing looking vintage characteristics you can get come from these lenses right here.